hidden memories. The grandfather clock in the foyer struck 3 as Olivia Westbrook closed her laptop. Rain pelted against the tall windows of the estate, a steady rhythm that only emphasized the emptiness of the house. 3 days into Julian's business trip to Singapore, and the silence had become oppressive. She wandered through the maze-like corridors of Westbrook Manor, her footsteps echoing on marble floors. After 2 years of marriage, she still felt like a visitor in some parts of the sprawling estate. Julian had purchased the historic property shortly before their wedding, a fresh start, he'd called it, though she sometimes wondered what exactly he'd been starting fresh from. Their relationship had been a whirlwind, meeting at a charity gala, engaged within 6 months, married in a lavish ceremony covered by society magazines. Julian Westbrook, financial prodigy and reclusive philanthropist, had swept her off her feet. Yet despite their passionate connection, she often sensed invisible walls around certain topics. His childhood, his years before moving to Boston, the faint sadness that sometimes clouded his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. "This house has too many secrets," Olivia murmured to herself, running her fingers along the wainscoting of the north wing. This section of the mansion remained largely untouched, with antique furniture draped in protective covers. Julian had mentioned renovating it eventually, but never seemed eager to begin. Her restlessness had brought her here today, armed with cleaning supplies and determination. If she couldn't decode her husband, she could at least tackle the mystery of this forgotten wing. The third bedroom was small compared to others, with sloped ceilings indicating its position near the roofline. A massive oak armoire dominated one wall, its ornate carvings gathering dust. Something about its placement seemed odd to Olivia. It stood at a slight angle, unlike the precise arrangement of furniture throughout the rest of the house. Curiosity piqued. She attempted to shift it, expecting resistance. Instead, it moved with surprising ease, gliding sideways on hidden casters. Behind it, the wallpaper pattern subtly changed. Running her fingers along the seam, Olivia felt a slight draft. Her heart quickened as she pressed against the panel, feeling it give way beneath her touch. A door, camouflaged within the wall. Design, swung inward on silent hinges. Olivia hesitated at the threshold of the hidden room, suddenly uncertain. Was this an invasion of privacy? But wasn't a marriage supposed to be without secrets? Steeling herself, she stepped inside. The space was small, perhaps 8 feet square, with a slanted ceiling and a single dormer window. Unlike the musty north wing, this room felt preserved rather than abandoned. The walls were painted a soft blue, and a reading lamp cast a warm glow over carefully arranged shelves. Her eyes moved slowly across the contents, a collection of astronomical books, a telescope, framed photographs of constellations, and a child-sized desk with star charts spread across its surface. In the corner stood a small easel with a half-finished painting of the night sky. On the central table lay a leather-bound journal, open to a page filled with a teenager's handwriting. Next to it sat a framed photograph that made Olivia's breath catch. Julian, younger, with longer hair and carefree eyes she'd never seen before, stood with his arm around a girl of about 15. She had his same sharp jawline and thoughtful expression, her dark hair cut in a stylish bob, her smile brilliant despite the hospital bracelet visible on her wrist. They were looking up at a night sky blazing with stars. With trembling fingers, Olivia picked up the photograph, turning it over to read the inscription on the back. "Dad and me at the Northfield Observatory. Best night ever. Love, Hannah." Dad. The word echoed in Olivia's mind as pieces of the puzzle that was her husband began to shift into new patterns. Julian had a daughter he had never once mentioned. Paper butterflies. The rain intensified outside as Olivia sank onto the small ottoman in the hidden room, the photograph of Julian and Hannah still clutched in her hands. The revelation left her dizzy with questions. How had Julian kept this part of his life completely hidden? Where was Hannah now? And why had he never trusted Olivia enough to share this with her? Setting down the photograph, she turned her attention to the journal. She hesitated, knowing she was crossing another boundary, but her need to understand outweighed her guilt. The pages revealed the thoughts of a bright, passionate teenage girl obsessed with astronomy. Hannah's voice leapt from the pages, witty, contemplative, occasionally frustrated with treatments and hospital stays, but never self-pitying. "Dad brought me a telescope today," one entry read. "He says when I'm better, we'll go to Chile to see the southern stars. I didn't tell him I heard. Dr. Fernandez talking about months, not years. Some promises are worth pretending for." Olivia's eyes blurred with tears. She moved methodically through the room, piecing together a life. Hannah had been 16 when the journal entries stopped abruptly. The astronomical theme was everywhere. Constellations painted on canvas, star, charts, books about cosmology. On one shelf, a collection of paper butterflies folded from star maps fluttered on thin threads. A medical folder revealed what Olivia had already begun to suspect: acute myeloid leukemia, diagnosed when Hannah was 14. Treatment timelines, clinical trial documents, and hospice arrangements painted the rest of the picture. Hannah had died 7 years ago, 3 years before Olivia had met Julian. In a wooden box, she found letters, dozens of them, written by Julian to his daughter after her death. They chronicled his grief, his guilt about returning to work, his struggle to find meaning. The most recent was dated just 2 weeks before their wedding. "I met someone, Stargazer," Julian had written, using what appeared to be his nickname for Hannah. "Her name is Olivia. You would like her. She challenges me, makes me laugh again. Sometimes I feel guilty about being happy. I haven't told her about you yet. I'm afraid once I start talking about you, I'll never be able to stop. I'm afraid she'll see how broken I still am." Olivia pressed the letter to her chest, her own grief intertwining with empathy for her husband. The room wasn't just a memorial. It was a confessional, a place where Julian could be his most vulnerable self, expressing the emotions he'd walled off from the rest of his life. Among the astronomy books, she found a small photo album. Pictures documented Hannah's childhood, Julian, as a young single father, Hannah growing from a toddler to a teenager. In several photos, a woman appeared alongside them, with warm eyes and a gentle smile. On the back of one picture, Hannah, Julian, and Camille, weekend at the lake. Camille. The name was unfamiliar, yet another piece of Julian's past he'd never shared. Was she Hannah's mother? A family friend? The intimacy in these photos suggested a deeper connection. As afternoon faded to evening, Olivia remained immersed in this parallel life her husband had lived. She learned that Hannah had been a gifted artist who dreamed of being an astrophysicist, that Julian had read The Little Prince to her during hospital stays, that they had made a tradition of watching meteor showers from the rooftop of their previous home. Outside the hidden room, the mansion's lights automatically switched on as darkness fell. Olivia gathered herself, carefully returning everything to its place except for one item, a small paper butterfly she tucked into her pocket. She closed the hidden door, positioning the armoire exactly as she had found it. In their bedroom, she sat at her vanity, studying her reflection. The woman looking back seemed different, weighed with new knowledge, but also with a strange sense of purpose. She hadn't just discovered Julian's past. She'd found the missing piece that explained the distance she'd always felt, the invisible barrier between them. Olivia pulled out the paper butterfly, its delicate wings crafted from a map of the Cassiopeia constellation. Looking at it, she made a decision. When Julian returned, she would show him the butterfly and open the door to honest conversation. She wouldn't confront him with accusations about his secrecy, but rather invite him to share his grief with her. "You don't have to hide her," Olivia whispered to Julian's absence. "And I want to know the man who loved his daughter enough to build her this sanctuary among the stars." The return. The sound of tires on gravel pulled Olivia from a restless sleep. 3 days had passed since her discovery, days spent alternating between their normal life and secret returns to Hannah's room, learning more about the stepdaughter. She'd never known she had. Julian wasn't due back until tomorrow. Curious, she slipped from bed and moved to the window. His familiar black Range Rover sat in the circular driveway, headlights illuminating the rain that continued to fall. He was home early, without warning, something unprecedented in their meticulously scheduled lives. She hurried downstairs, still in her silk pajamas, and opened the front door just as Julian reached the steps. His normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, tie loosened, hair rumpled, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "The deal fell through," he said before she could speak, dropping his luggage in the foyer. "Completely collapsed. 2 years of work. For nothing." "I'm sorry," she offered, embracing him. The failure explained his unexpected return and haggard appearance, but beneath his professional frustration, she sensed something else, a raw vulnerability she'd glimpsed only rarely. "Sometimes I wonder why I keep doing this," he murmured into her hair, "building things that can fall apart so easily." The words carried more weight now that she understood their context. She led him to the kitchen, where she made tea while he loosened his tie and described the business disaster in Singapore. She listened, noting how he focused exclusively on facts and figures, careful as always to keep emotions at a clinical distance. When he finally fell silent, she reached into her pocket and withdrew the paper butterfly she'd been carrying since her discovery. She placed it gently on the kitchen island between them. Julian froze, his teacup halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face as he stared at the delicate origami creation. "Where did you get that?" His voice was barely audible. "I found a room," Olivia said softly, "behind the armoire in the north wing." He set down his cup with deliberate care, his knuckles white. "You went through my things." "I wasn't searching for secrets, Julian. I was cleaning, and I found a door." He stood abruptly, turning away from her. "That room is private." Like Hannah was private. The words slipped out before she could stop them. "Like Camille was private? You have a whole life you've never shared with me." He whirled to face her, eyes flashing. "You had no right." "I'm your wife." Her voice broke on the last word. "We've been married for 2 years, and I didn't know you had a daughter. I didn't know you'd experienced the worst loss imaginable." "How is that a marriage?" Julian braced himself against the counter, shoulders hunched. "I couldn't," he started, then stopped. "I don't know how to talk about her." "But you write to her," Olivia said gently. "I read your letters." His head snapped up, betrayal etched across his features. "I'm sorry," she continued quickly. "But Julian, I needed to understand. And what I understand now is that I've been loving half a man. You've kept the most important parts of yourself locked away." "The most painful parts," he corrected, his voice hollow. Olivia moved toward him slowly, as one might approach a wounded animal. "Pain is part of who we are. You know every scar in my history, my parents' divorce, my college struggles, even my failed engagement. But you've hidden your deepest wounds." Julian's composure cracked. He sank onto a kitchen stool, covering his face with his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "I couldn't save her," he whispered. "With all my resources, all my connections, I couldn't save my own daughter." Olivia took his hands in hers. "Tell me about her. Please, tell me about Hannah." And there, As rain pattered against the windows and dawn crept over the horizon, Julian Westbrook finally spoke about his daughter, haltingly at first, then in a torrent of memories, grief, and love that had been contained for too long. He told Olivia about Hannah's brilliance, her fascination with stars, her courage through treatments. He explained that Camille had been his partner for several years, Hannah's stepmother who had left when the stress of Hannah's illness became too much. As morning light filled the kitchen, Julian reached the hardest part, the final days, the hospice nurse's quiet confirmation, the funeral where he'd stood alone because he'd pushed everyone else away. After she died, I became someone else, he admitted. Someone focused only on work, on control. I never intended to love anyone again. He looked at Olivia with wonder. And then there was you. Olivia squeezed his hands. I want to know her, through you. I want to help you carry this, not hide it. Julian's phone chimed with meeting reminders, but for the first time in their marriage, he ignored it completely. Instead, he stood and held out his hand to his wife. There's something I need to show you, he said quietly. Together, they walked toward the north wing and the hidden room that would no longer be a secret. Bridges built. She loved mythology almost as much as astronomy, Julian explained, gently tracing the constellation map on Hannah's wall. She said the stars were like bridges between science and stories. It was their third day of barely leaving, the hidden room. Julian had canceled all appointments, citing a family emergency, words that had felt foreign on his tongue but strangely right. Now, surrounded by Hannah's belongings, he was slowly unwrapping his memories, sharing them with Olivia, one story at a time. This telescope was our first serious one, he continued, adjusting the instrument that sat by the window. We'd saved for it together. She insisted on contributing from her babysitting money, even though I could have bought it outright. Olivia smiled, imagining the stubborn teenager Hannah must have been. She got that independence from you. More likely despite me, Julian corrected with a rueful laugh. I was overprotective even before the diagnosis. After... He trailed off, his fingers resting on a hospital bracelet preserved in a small frame. Olivia moved beside him, her shoulder touching his. Tell me about that day, the one in the photograph at the observatory. It had become their rhythm. Olivia asking specific questions, helping Julian navigate memories he'd kept sealed away. The specificity seemed to make it easier for him, focusing his grief into manageable pieces rather than an overwhelming flood. It was during a remission, he said. We'd just gotten good news about her blood counts, and she insisted on celebrating by visiting Northfield Observatory for a meteor shower. Her doctors advised against it. Her immune system was still compromised, but Hannah was... He searched for the word. Determined, Olivia supplied. Unstoppable, Julian corrected, smiling slightly. We bundled her up in masks and scarves, drove 3 hours and spent the night watching the Perseids. She kept saying it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. His voice grew softer. 2 weeks later, the cancer was back, more aggressive than before. Olivia leaned into him, offering silent support. Julian wrapped an arm around her shoulders, drawing strength from her presence. I've been unfair to you, he admitted. I married you without showing you who I really am. You showed me parts, Olivia countered. The parts you thought were safe, the parts that weren't broken. Julian shook his head. I think I wanted to become someone new, someone without a past. But Hannah deserved better than to be erased. She wasn't erased, Olivia gestured around the room. She was preserved, protected. She hesitated. But maybe too separated from your daily life? From our life together? Julian considered this, looking around at the shrine-like quality of the hidden room. I couldn't bear to dismantle it, but I couldn't bear to look at it every day either. So I locked it away, like I locked away talking about her. The conversation shifted as Olivia shared her own stories. Her childhood dream of becoming a concert pianist, abandoned after her parents' bitter divorce, left no money for lessons. Her years working 3 jobs to put herself through college. The engagement to a man who had ultimately wanted her to be decorative rather than ambitious. Julian listened, intently, realizing how much deeper her experiences went than the polished version he'd originally known. They were both guilty of presenting curated versions of themselves, he reflected. As evening approached, Olivia hesitantly broached the subject of Camille. Julian's expression tightened momentarily before relaxing into resignation. She was a good person who couldn't handle watching a child die, he said simply. I resented her for years, but eventually understood. Not everyone can walk through fire. Did you love her? Olivia asked quietly. Yes, Julian answered honestly, but differently than I love you. With Camille, I was still the person I was before Hannah got sick. More carefree, less driven. With you, he looked at her thoughtfully. You met me at my most damaged and somehow saw something worth loving anyway. Olivia took his hand. Not damaged, just incomplete, because you were trying to exist without your history. They ventured out of the room for the first time in hours, walking the grounds of the estate as twilight settled. Above them, stars began to appear, pinpoints of light against deepening blue. Hannah would have loved you, Julian said suddenly. You have the same way of cutting through my defenses. Olivia smiled, blinking back tears. I wish I could have known her. You can, Julian replied. Not in the way I did, but through me, through her art, her writing. He stopped walking, turning to face her. If you want to, that is. Olivia reached up to touch his face. I want to know every part of you, the joy and the pain. That's what marriage is supposed to be. Under the emerging stars, they made plans. Not just for Hannah's room, which they decided would be relocated to a space where it could be visited rather than hidden, but for themselves. Julian spoke of therapy, of learning to integrate his grief rather than compartmentalizing it. Olivia shared her desire to finally pursue music again, a dream she'd set aside. That night, for the first time in their marriage, they fell asleep with no secrets between them, the walls that had separated their inner lives finally beginning to crumble. New beginnings 1 year later, the grand ballroom of Westbrook Manor sparkled with candlelight as benefactors and scientists mingled beneath a ceiling painted to resemble the night sky. Olivia moved through the crowd in a midnight blue gown, stopping to thank donors and answer questions about the newly established Hannah Westbrook Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research. In the center of the room stood a magnificent telescope, a replica of the one Hannah had used, surrounded by her artwork, and astronomical charts. No longer hidden away, her presence had become an inspiration. Her passion for the stars translated into hope for other children fighting similar battles. Mrs. Westbrook? A young researcher approached, extending her hand. Dr. Prisha Sharma, I wanted to thank you personally. The grant from your foundation will allow us to continue our work on targeted immunotherapy. Olivia smiled warmly. Julian should be the one you thank. This was his vision. Our vision, Julian corrected, appearing at her side with 2 champagne flutes. He handed one to Olivia before turning to the scientist. Dr. Sharma's work shows remarkable promise for reducing side effects in childhood leukemia treatments. The doctor beamed. With your funding, we've moved the timeline up by nearly 2 years. Children who might have had no options will now have access to clinical trials by next spring. After the doctor moved on, Julian slipped his arm around Olivia's waist. Hannah would have been asking her 1,000 questions about the research methodology and probably suggesting improvements, Olivia added with a fond smile. Julian nodded, gazing around the transformed ballroom. What had once been a space used only for obligatory business entertaining had become the heart of their philanthropic work. In the past year, they'd hosted science fairs for local schools, astronomy nights, and fundraisers that had generated millions for pediatric cancer research. "I have something to show you," Olivia said, taking his hand and leading him away from the crowd. They slipped through French doors onto the terrace where the spring night was cool and clear. "Look up," she instructed. Julian tilted his head toward the sky. "Cassiopeia," he identified immediately. "Hannah's favorite." "Not just that," Olivia said softly. "There." She pointed to a specific area within the constellation. Julian frowned, confused. Then understanding dawned as she handed him an official-looking certificate. "You named a star for her," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I registered it officially through the International Astronomical Union's scientific naming program," Olivia explained. "It's not just a novelty certificate, it's in the actual scientific catalog. HD 220237 is now officially designated as Hannah's star in the research databases." Julian stared at the certificate, then back at the distant point of light that now bore his daughter's name. "How did you manage that? The IAU rarely approves personal names." "I had help from Dr. Fernandez, Hannah's oncologist. He's on their committee now. When I told him what we were doing with the foundation, he championed the petition." She squeezed his hand. "He never forgot her." They stood in companionable silence, watching the stars together. After a moment, Julian placed his hand gently on Olivia's abdomen, still flat but harboring their secret. "Have you thought more about names?" he asked quietly. Olivia covered his hand with hers. At 3 months pregnant, they'd told no one yet, still processing the mixture of joy and complexity the pregnancy brought. "I've been thinking about Penelope," she admitted. "It means weaver in Greek, someone who brings threads together." Julian smiled. "Penelope Westbrook. I like it." He hesitated. "And if it's a boy?" "What about Thomas?" Olivia suggested. "It was my grandfather's name." Julian nodded thoughtfully. "Thomas Hannah Westbrook has a good sound to it." Olivia looked at him in surprise. "You'd want to use Hannah as a middle name for a boy?" "Why not? Names are bridges, too, connecting past and future." Julian looked back toward the ballroom where their guests continued celebrating under the painted stars. "A year ago, I couldn't imagine having another child. The thought of loving someone that deeply again was terrifying. And now?" Olivia asked softly. "Now I understand that Hannah made me capable of more love, not less," Julian answered. "She expanded my heart. And wherever she is," he glanced upward at the star that now bore her name, "I think she'd be happy to know her legacy includes joy, not just remembrance." Inside, the orchestra began playing a waltz. Julian turned to his wife, extending his hand with a formal bow that made her laugh. "Mrs. Westbrook, would you do me the honor?" They danced on the terrace under the watchful eye of Hannah's star, their steps as fluid and harmonious as their lives had become. The hidden room was no longer hidden, transformed into a memorial library open to young cancer patients who shared Hannah's love of astronomy. Her journals had been published, her artwork featured in hospital corridors, and in the subtle curve of Olivia's gown, the future grew. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a new constellation in the expanding universe of their family. As the music swelled, Julian pulled Olivia closer, whispering in her ear, "Thank you for finding that room." Olivia smiled against his shoulder. "Thank you for letting me in." Above them, Hannah's star twinkled brightly, one light among many in the vast, beautiful darkness.